Hello, welcome everyone to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. My name is Heike Ritter and I will be your host. If you haven't yet, we have a YouTube channel and there is a little bell, so activate it so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. Today we are going to talk about the integration with Azure Logic Apps, and I have Christos with me again. He was already part of a previous season, so regardless, Chris, please introduce yourself for those that haven't seen the episode with you before.
Hi, Heike. I'm happy to be back. My name is Christos Ventouris. I am a member of the product engineering team for Microsoft 365 Defender.
Thank you. And so let's first clarify, what is Azure Logic Apps?
Yeah, sure. So Logic Apps is an Azure service based on the cloud where you can create and you can run automated workflows by using little to no code, literally. You can use a visual designer and select from pre-built operations and connectors where you can build your own workflow and integrate with your applications, with your data, with your Microsoft services and third-party services and systems.
Okay, and because I'm totally new to this, but I used something that sounds very similar before, which is Power Automate. Like, what's the difference there? Like, do you have two services doing the same, or is it specific to different audiences?
Actually, you're right. So Power Automate is built on top of Logic Apps, actually. And Power Automate is focused on end users in Office 365, while Logic Apps is focused on IT pros and admins of Azure organizations.
Okay, because I think this is super simple, creating such a Power Automate flow to automate various tasks. So why are our customers, because you're working a lot with customers, so what are common use case scenarios our customers are integrating with Azure Logic App?
Well, I have seen several times where SOC teams of our customers are using Logic Apps to automate tasks that are related to security automation and security response. So think about things like taking actions against devices automatically, automating email notifications to end users, coordinating actions to third-party tools, which are just a few things to name as use cases for Logic Apps. Another way to think of it is that Logic Apps working with Microsoft 365 Defender could help a SOC team create their own attack disruption scenarios.
Mm. Yeah, I was just thinking it's basically like your own little workbook, right? So, okay. So you search for something or you have a specific trigger and then you take specific action that might be a little bit more complicated than, because in the portal you can use as well actions, custom detections that you can create. But I think it's a little bit more complex, that the scenarios you can create.
That's right. So custom detections have a specific set of actions that you can take once a trigger is hit. However, with Logic Apps, you have many more avenues that you can take. So you can have a Logic App that connects to different services, first party or third party. You can have parallelism while running a Logic App. You can have decision trees. The limits are almost endless.
Okay. And I think I wanted to say playbooks and not workbooks, but yeah. Okay.
That's correct. Yes. So playbooks is more accurate.
So I know when we discussed this episode that we need to do a few things in order to get to what we want to achieve and to not confuse everyone. Do we want to quickly have a look at what are the various steps that we are going to take in this demo that you walk us through?
Yes, sure. So there are some steps that someone needs to take in order to start creating the Logic App. Is that you need to, first of all, create an Azure App Registration. The app registration is, we can call it like a credential that your Logic App will use to connect to the Microsoft 365 Defender service. So in the Azure portal, you will create an app registration, you will assign permissions for Microsoft 365 Defender, depending on your scenario. In our scenario that we will show later, we are going to, we have given it permissions for running advanced hunting queries. And then we need to create a secret. So the same way that we have a username and a password, or a username and an authentication app to log on to a service, in a similar manner, we need to create a secret to enable the Logic app to authenticate to Microsoft 365 Defender. Once we have the app registration ready, then we can switch to our Logic app and start building our logic structure.
Okay, so that means, Christos, we are now going to look or like hop into the Azure portal to start doing the app creation.
Sure, yeah. So in the Azure portal, we need to go first to app registrations from the Azure portal homepage, and then create a new registration. We have to give it a name.
Ninja.
Ninja, let's call it Ninja.
Yes.
And we are going to have that account access only, our tenant only. We create the app registration. And then we have to do two things. First, we have to create a secret, as we discussed a few minutes before. So I will create a secret. I will call it our Ninja secret. You have to give it a lifetime. We'll keep it to the default of 6 months. And once we create our secret, we then have to assign it permissions. Now, the permissions will be added through this flyout. We click on my APIs my organization uses, and when we are going to search for Microsoft Threat Protection, we select application permissions and we select advanced hunting.
Okay, so just for everyone, so this is now Microsoft 365 Defender.
Yeah.
This is the apps, the APIs that you are using here for Microsoft 365 Defender.
Exactly. So these are the API permissions we're going to provide to this specific app registration.
Okay, and you just selected right now advanced hunting, read, so you could have selected...
I could have selected incidents, so we can also access incidents, so either read or read and write, or we can also use custom detections.
Okay, thank you.
Once we do that, last step, you see that there is a message saying not granted for RDB, which is our tenant name. So we need to grant admin consent so that our app registration is now functional.
Okay, so in order to do this, for this tenant right now, you're a global admin, so you're configuring the application.
Yes.
And then you're granting other users now specific access.
We're granting access to the app registration so that practically we enable the app registration with the permissions that we assign. Once we do that, we have to take note of the secret that we created, and then this information, the application ID and the tenant ID, pieces of information with the client secret that we will need to enter in our Logic app.
Okay, so now the Logic app in general is created, and now we need to create our, let's call it playbook, right?
We created the app registration. Now we will create our Logic. We will go back to our Logic app.
Okay. So before we get there, I think we wanted to have a look at what is our scenario.
Yes.
To summarize it for everyone. So I think we want to search for sensitive devices, and whatever that is for every organization. You might have devices that have very sensitive data on it or something, or used by administrators or whatever, or executives, where a malicious email was received that was not successfully zapped by Defender for Office 365, and then decide to take various actions on the devices or users that we found. That's right?
Yes, that's right. To achieve that, first of all, we will run a hunting query to look for ZAP actions that were not successful in Microsoft Defender for Office. Then we will combine that information with the logons of the users who are the recipients of these emails. Then we're going to cross-reference those user accounts to the devices that they are using. And once we get a list of devices that are associated with the failed ZAP action on a mailbox, on a user's mailbox, we are going to partially isolate those devices if they are sensitive or if they belong to the SOC team.
Okay.
And as a last step, if the user who is affected by this type of event is member of the SOC team, then we will also remove these users' membership from the SOC team. Now, the hunting query that we are using is also available in our GitHub page.
Oh, yeah, that's a good call out. And we have a short link, which is then Advanced Hunting Query Email Devices, in short, AHQID. Okay, so now let's go and create our app. I'm excited.
Yeah. The first thing you need to do is to go to the Azure portal and go to Logic Apps and then create a new app. I will be skipping that part because it takes some time to create the Logic App. However, in our documentation, here you can find all the information on how to create your Logic App. There are some settings that you need to select based on the use case for having a Logic App. So the documentation will help you create that according to your needs.
Yeah, it's basically just saving some time because it's a lot of copy and pasting the different values that you need.
Yes.
But we will go through and have a look at our values so that you can compare it with maybe what you want to create out there.
Yeah. So this is the Logic App I created. I call it M65D response. Then I'm going to workflows, and this is where I have built my Logic App. So there are two ways to work on the development of your Logic App. One is by using code, and the other by using the designer. Either way works. The difference is that you need to have some experience in writing your Logic App as code, and whatever you create as code will also show up in the designer, and vice versa. So I've taken the easy path, and I use the designer to create my Logic App.
That's why we created the designer, to make it easy,
exactly. Right? For people like me who don't know how to code the Logic App. So as you see, this is the visual designer. You can these boxes that we see here are practically operations that you want the Logic App to execute. I've started by a recurrence, so I will not have an external trigger launching my Logic App. I will just have set it
so if
to
you
run
click on it, you're basically, yes, every hour that's your trigger. Every hour it's looking for something.
Every hour it will launch the rest of the steps that you see below it. So the first thing I need to do, as we discussed in the scenario, is that I need to connect to the Microsoft 365 Defender API. This is a custom connector based on the HTTP protocol because the Microsoft 365 Defender does not have its own Logic App connector compared, for example, to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which we will see later, has its own native connector within Logic Apps. So we are going to use an HTTP-based connection to the API to run our hunting query. Now we have to construct our connection to the Defender API, and we are doing it by creating a generic custom connector for HTTP. Microsoft 365 Defender does not have its own native connector within Logic Apps as compared to Defender for Endpoint, as you will see later on. Mm-hmm. So we need to kind of manually connect to the API of Microsoft 365 Defender and execute a hunting query. So in the connection, we mentioned the endpoint of the hunting API. And this is the place where we are providing all the information that we collected when we did our app registration. So the tenant ID, the client ID, and the app secret. And of course, we have to provide the hunting query.
And because I don't see values, that means you created something to store the secrets.
So yeah, that's right. So you can use parameters, and parameters can help you store pieces of information where you will be reusing within your Logic app. This is saving you time from copying and pasting the same strings or entering the same information in different areas of your Logic app. And if you need to change one of these strings, and you don't have to go again to edit those values again. So there's a place in the visual designer where you can create your own parameters. And this is where I have created the parameter where I call it hunting query, and it contains my hunting query here.
Perfect. Okay. And then also tenant ID and the secret. We don't open that yet, but this is all stored in there.
This is where I've also stored my tenant ID, my secret, etc. This is also helpful when you export your Logic app as code, and when you want to publish it, for example, on GitHub, or you want to share it with others, then it is easy to remove the information which is sensitive to your organization. So it is easier to generalize your code in that way. So once we are connected to the API, we will get some results. So we'll get one row or more than one rows as a result. That information needs to be processed because we are getting a JSON construct that needs to be processed so that the values that are returned from the hunting query can be reused in the following steps of the Logic app. So I'm parsing the information here. And then we have to provide the schema for the parser so that it knows how to parse the information. And you can do that by just uploading a previous hunting query result to the text box, and then it will automatically create the schema for you.
Oh, okay, nice. Any other settings that you need to do here?
No,
Anything
nothing else. You just need to enter the body. So basically, this is the result of the previous step that you provide. You type it here, you just name it here, and then the schema, and that's it.
So, and now for each line item or row that comes back,
it is likely that you will have more than one results, right? So you may get one result, or you may get 10 results. So you need to iterate through the results of the response that you got from the hunting query. So this entire block is iterating one result at a time. And now we are leveraging the native connector of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint to get information on the device which is associated to the query that we constructed. So from the results of the device, we are grabbing the device ID. And then we create a condition. So it is like an if statement. So we are saying...
before we get there, Christos, I know you grabbed that advanced hunting query from the documentation. It was all there. You just copy and paste it. But basically, again, to remind everyone, we are looking for sensitive devices, which means they're somehow tagged by your organization as sensitive. And where an email was received that was not successfully zapped by Defender for Office 365. This is basically the advanced hunting query. So you look in specific tables for values and then fed into the parsed JSON step. And then you get multiple results. And now for each of them, you do something. And now let's go into doing something.
Right. So we are using Defender for Endpoint to get the tags of each machine that we got as a result from the hunting query. And then I'm running a condition statement, which is like an if statement. So I'm saying if the device has a machine tag which is equal to sensitive or a CISO, which are manual tags that our organization may have assigned to our devices when they were onboarding them, then we will do something. So if that statement is true, we will follow that path. If it's false, we will follow this path. Now,
Okay.
let's suppose we have a device from the SOC or a sensitive device. Now, we are still using the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint connector to isolate the machine. And just let me open a temporary action window here just to show you the capabilities that you have with the Microsoft with MD connector. So Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So if you type Defender,
It's also an old name.
yeah. So these are not just 3 actions that you can take with a connector. You can see that for many of the connectors in the list, you can click on the See More button, so you will see the full list of actions that are available with your connector. So with Microsoft Defender ATP, you can use advanced hunting for the endpoint specific tables. You can take actions on a machine. You can get the status of an action that you have requested for the machine. So think about all the tasks, all the actions that you can take from the UI. You can take them from the Logic App as well. So isolate and isolate, get list of alerts, get entity information, so file, IP, domain entity information, etc.
Okay, in our case, we picked isolate the machine.
That's correct. So once you select the isolate device, you need to tell the Logic App which device you want to isolate. And this information has been grabbed from the previous step, which was the step of getting the information of each device. So we have the device.
If it's sensitive and if it's SOC. CSOC.
That's right. So we add the value of the device. We put a comment. This will show up in the API and in the Action Center. And you can choose what type of isolation you want to execute, a full or a selective. After we isolate the device, we said that we are adding one more step. If the user of the device is a member of the SOC, then we will also remove that membership from that user. So we're going to one step further, and we are using Azure AD. This is an Azure AD connector, so Entra ID connector.
Entra ID,
correct?
Yes.
Where we are fetching the groups where the user is a member of. And we have the information of the user, we have the email address of the user, so we are using that information from the hunting query. So we get the group memberships. The user may have one or more group memberships. So we are now iterating the memberships of the user. So let's say.
Oh, so you're going through all the groups
memberships
that user is part of.
Exactly.
Okay.
So now we are looking for a specific group membership. And if it is equal to that group ID, then we will again use another Entra ID collector action to remove that member from the group. If it is not a member of the SOC, then we will just take no action and move to the next group membership. So this is what we are doing if the device is sensitive or is part of the SOC, and the user is also a SOC member. Now, if this condition is not met, so as we said, if the device is not sensitive and if the user is not member of the SOC, we are just going to update the user information using the Entra ID connector. In my case, what I did is I added an additional property to the user information, and I created a new key and I call it status, and with a value of potentially compromised. This is additional metadata for the user account. Now think of it like an input to another Logic App, possibly, that is looking for users who have that status tag, and then we can take other actions to the user. So we could, for example, modify their conditional access status. And then we are sending an email to the user. So this is another connector. This is the Outlook for Office 365 connector. And we can craft our own email notification that will go to the user whose mailbox item was not zapped successfully.
Okay.
And that's it.
This is pretty cool. Again, of course, you need to first think about what are the triggers or what are you looking for, what can't be done directly from in the portal, right? Because there is already actions that you can use with custom detections. And we actually talked about custom detections in the previous season with some actions. It's super simple to set it up, I think. I mean, I didn't do it, but by just following you, I feel like if you follow these documentation steps, it's not too complicated. And with that, can we quickly have a look at the code? I'm just curious to see how that looks like.
So the code is practically a JSON code based on JSON. So it has a schema definition, and then each of these segments is one of the Logic App boxes that we created.
Good, Christos. So you explained there is, of course, various built-in connectors already, not for everything. So basically, if you can't find a built-in connector, which we usually would recommend everyone to use because it's simple and everything is already set up, then you need to do your own, which is in our case, step number 2, your own connector via probably APIs.
That's right. So you can use connectors for different things. In our case, we use an HTTP connector to connect to the APIs since we don't have a native one.
Okay. And then we still, of course, use native ones for all the device information and for the device actions, as well as for Entra ID information and actions.
Right.
And there are existing connectors.
Yes. In that specific example, we used the native connectors of Defender for Endpoint, Entra ID, and Outlook for Office 365.
Very cool. Any last closing words from you?
I would ask our viewers to try their hand with Logic Apps, connect with the Microsoft Defender API, and if they have any questions or they are getting stuck or they want to have a conversation about us, feel free to comment and initiate a discussion with us.
Yes, because I remember when I started, I know it's the end user experience, the Power Automate, as I learned earlier. But it's actually so much fun what you can create, and you come from one idea to the next. So yes, I agree. I encourage everyone to try it out. And you can always come back to that episode and ask your questions in the comments. Okay, thank you so much, Christos, for another episode with me here on the Ninja Show. And for you, everyone out there, again, short reminder, go to our YouTube channel and subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. I hope you learned new things today, and see you soon when we are on with our next episode. Bye.